The restaurant was fancy and quiet, with soft music playing and waiters moving gently from table to table. People came here to enjoy their evening, dress well, eat good food, and maybe spot a celebrity or two. But that night, something different happened, something people would talk about for a long time. She walked in wearing shiny heels and a dress that screamed for attention. Her voice was loud, even before she reached her table. She didn't look at the waiter who greeted her, just waved her hand and said, "Table by the window now." Other guests turned their heads, watching her with mild surprise. She didn't notice or care. She sat down, threw her bag on the next chair, and started scrolling through her phone. When the waiter returned with the menu, she didn't say thank you. She said, "I hope the chef here knows how to cook steak." "Right," the waiter gave a polite smile, trying his best to stay calm. He had served celebrities and powerful people before, but this woman acted like she owned the place. She rolled her eyes when he asked about drinks. "Bring me a red wine, something expensive, not that cheap stuff," she said. Two men were sitting quietly at a table not far from hers. They wore simple clothes, black shirts, nothing too flashy. They didn't talk much, just smiled at the staff and nodded when spoken to. They looked calm, gentle, and friendly. Nobody seemed to bother them, at least not yet. The loud woman noticed them when the waiter brought their food first. She raised her voice and said, "Excuse me, I ordered before them. Why are they being served first?" Her voice echoed across the room. The waiter explained politely that the kitchen had different timings, but she wasn't listening. She looked at the two men and laughed. "What are they, VIPs or something?" She said loud enough for others to hear. "They look like they should be waiting tables, not eating here." The two men glanced at each other, then went back to their meals. One of them gave a small smile and took a sip of water. The other quietly thanked the waiter. They didn't say a single rude word. Even after being insulted, she kept talking, now complaining about celebrities. "Actors these days think they're so smart just because they're in movies," she said. "Most of them wouldn't survive a real job. They should try living like us normal people for once." A couple sitting at another table looked up, their eyes wide. They seemed to recognize the men she was insulting. The woman leaned toward her husband and whispered something. He pulled out his phone and started typing quickly, maybe looking something up. The woman continued her rant. "And don't get me started on those so-called nice guys of Hollywood. All fake smiles and charity shows," she said. "I bet those two over there are dreaming about being famous." The waiter walked by, a little nervous now. He knew who the men were. Everyone who worked at this restaurant knew, but they had strict rules. No asking for photos, no treating them differently unless they asked for it. Still, it was hard to watch someone insult such kind guests without reason. The louder she got, the more uncomfortable the room became. People were now whispering, staring, trying not to laugh or speak out. A few guests began secretly recording the situation on their phones, just in case it turned into something big. The two men said nothing, not once. They kept their heads down, continued eating quietly, and never reacted, even when she mocked their clothes, even when she called them nobodies. The woman didn't notice how many people were now looking at her with disgust. She was too busy trying to show off, bragging about her rich friends, her connections to real celebrities, and how she once dined with a producer, who she claimed gave her special access to a film set. "People like them," she said, pointing toward the two men again. "Should be thankful they even get to eat in a place like this. I bet they used their last dollar to come here." The waiter dropped a spoon behind the counter and bent down quickly. Not wanting to show his face, some of the staff were whispering in the back, trying not to laugh or cry, and still, the two men sat in silence. One of them gave a small chuckle, not out of anger, but almost like he had seen this kind of thing before. The other just looked at his plate, his calm expression never changing. A gentle storm was building in the room, not a loud one, but something quiet and powerful. People could feel it, like something big was about to happen. A moment that would flip everything upside down, and the woman, still smiling, still proud, had no idea she was about to become the story everyone would remember. The woman kept speaking loudly as she ate. She was now complaining about the waiter, saying the wine was too warm and the bread was too dry. She even called over another waiter just to send him away with a wave, saying, "You're too slow." The people sitting nearby were trying to ignore her, but it was hard. Her voice filled the room like unwanted noise. Still, the two quiet men sitting at the other table didn't seem bothered. They stayed calm, speaking only in soft tones to each other, never raising their voices, never reacting. But the woman wasn't done. She glanced at them again, narrowed her eyes and said, "You'd think someone would teach them how to dress before coming to a place like this." She laughed to herself, then looked around for agreement, but no one joined her. A young couple sitting nearby whispered to each other. "That's Keanu Reeves," the man said quietly. "And that's Denzel Washington," the woman replied. They stared in shock, realizing who the woman had been insulting this whole time, but the woman still had no idea. She was too caught up in her own world. She pulled out her phone, started scrolling through pictures of herself in expensive places, bragging loudly about her connections in the movie industry. "I know real stars," she said, "not these wannabes." At that moment, the waiter brought more water to the quiet table, and the woman raised her voice again. "Can you please stop giving them royal service?" she said sharply. "You act like there's someone special." The waiter didn't respond, but his face was turning red. He knew exactly who the two men were. So did the manager. So did most of the staff. But they were trained to stay professional, to keep calm no matter what. The woman, however, was testing everyone's patience. Keanu smiled at the waiter and said gently, "Thank you, you're doing great." Denzel nodded and added, "Ignore the noise. You're doing your job well." Their voices were soft but full of kindness. The waiter gave a small smile and walked away quickly before the woman could say more. Meanwhile, a few other guests had taken out their phones and were secretly recording now. One man zoomed in on Keanu's face and whispered to the person next to him, "I can't believe this is happening. She doesn't even know who she's talking about." The woman leaned back in her chair, still smiling. She seemed proud of herself, as if she had won some imaginary battle. "People need to learn their place," she said. "You can't just walk into places like this and expect to be treated like royalty." A teenage boy sitting with his parents kept looking at Keanu. His eyes were wide, like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. His mother whispered, "Don't stare." But even she looked impressed. More people were starting to whisper now, passing quiet messages across the room, all about the same thing. "Is that really them?" "Yes, it's Keanu and Denzel. She's insulting both of them." "Oh my God." The woman finally noticed people whispering and looking at the quiet table. But she misunderstood. She laughed and said, "What? You all just now realize they're not important?" She shook her head. "I told you, I can smell fake stars from a mile away." Keanu reached for his drink and gave Denzel a small smile. They still hadn't said anything back to the woman. Not a single rude word. They didn't look angry, just calm, peaceful, like men who had already seen too much in life to be shaken by one loud voice. A man near the back of the room looked up from his phone and said softly, "She's going to regret this." His wife nodded. "She has no idea how badly she's embarrassing herself." The waiter returned to the woman's table and carefully placed a small dessert plate beside her. She looked at it and said, "Finally something good." Then she glared at the waiter and asked, "Are you going to keep giving all your attention to those two? Or are you going to serve me like I deserve?" The waiter didn't answer. He just walked away with a heavy heart. But the moment he turned, a young girl with long brown hair, about 12 years old, stood up from her chair. She was holding something in her hand, a folded napkin. She walked slowly toward the two men, her eyes focused on Keanu. Everyone in the restaurant watched her as she moved quietly through the tables. The woman also stared, confused and slightly annoyed. What now? She whispered to herself. The girl reached Keanu's table and gently placed the napkin in front of him. "Excuse me," she said, her voice soft. "Can I please have your autograph? You helped me believe in kindness." The entire room went silent. You could hear the sound of a spoon dropping somewhere in the distance. The woman's jaw dropped slightly. Her eyes flicked between the girl and the two men. Keanu took the napkin with a warm smile and said, "Of course." He signed it, then looked into the girl's eyes and said, "Thank you for being brave." Denzel gave her a small thumbs up, and the girl smiled before walking back to her parents. Now, the woman's hands were shaking a little. Her face had lost some of its color, and the truth was starting to sink in. But it was only the beginning. The little girl had gone back to her seat, smiling and holding the signed napkin like a treasure. Her parents hugged her softly, proud of her courage. But across the room, the woman in the fancy dress sat frozen. Her eyes were wide, and her lips slightly open. She was finally starting to understand. Still, her pride didn't let her stop. She cleared her throat and laughed nervously. Sure, maybe he looks like that one guy from the movies," she said to the couple next to her. "But let's be honest, they can't really be them, right?" She gave a short laugh, but no one laughed with her. Then a man walked over to Denzel's table, holding his phone. He said respectfully, "Sir, I just want to say, your movie fences changed my life." His voice shook a little. Denzel stood up and shook his hand gently, saying, "Thank you, brother. That means a lot." The room stayed quiet, but not the awkward kind. It was the kind of silence that comes when something important is happening, something real, something that people would remember. People kept whispering softly, but no one was loud anymore, except the woman. She sat back and crossed her arms, trying to act calm, but her fingers tapped the table quickly. She looked at Keanu and Denzel again, this time longer. She started to notice the familiar faces, the way they moved, the way they spoke, slowly. Her confidence began to fade. Then, she tried to joke again, this time louder. "So what if they're actors?" she said. "They still dress like they came from a garage sale." She gave a forced laugh, but this time, someone at another table turned to her and said calmly, "You should stop now." She looked shocked. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice rising again. "Do you even know who I am?" The woman who had spoken didn't reply, but gave her a sharp look before turning back to her meal. Around the room, more people were starting to turn away from the loud woman. Keanu looked up for the first time in a while. He didn't raise his voice. He simply said in a calm tone, "Some people wear kindness like a crown." Then he took another sip of water. Denzel nodded beside him and added, "And some wear noise like armor." The woman blinked, not sure what to say. She was used to shouting over others, but now, no one wanted to listen. Her words were becoming empty, powerless. Then something happened that no one expected. A waiter walked over with a box of chocolates and placed it on Keanu's table. "This is from the manager," he said. "He just wanted to say thank you for always being humble and kind whenever you visit." A small round of soft claps began around the room. People weren't cheering loudly, but their applause was full of respect. One by one, guests began to smile, nodding toward the two men as if thanking them silently for something they hadn't even done that night, but had done for years with their actions and their hearts. The woman now looked very small in her chair. Her eyes darted around, looking for someone to support her, but no one would even meet her gaze. She picked up her napkin and fidgeted with it, folding and unfolding it nervously. She tried one last time, reaching into her purse and pulling out her phone. She stood up and said, "Fine, I'll just record this myself, since everyone's acting like this is some big deal." She pointed the phone toward Keanu's table, but before she could hit record, a deep voice came from behind her. "That's enough." It was the restaurant manager. He had a calm but serious expression. "Ma'am, I believe it's time you stopped causing a scene." She turned, shocked. "You're kicking me out." she asked, her voice breaking a little. "You're defending them over me?" The manager looked at her and said gently, "We defend kindness here always." Her lips trembled, and for a second she looked like she might cry, but instead, she dropped her phone back into her purse and sat down slowly. Her back was straight, but her face showed defeat. She didn't say another word. Keanu leaned slightly toward the manager and said quietly, "No need to embarrass her." The manager nodded respectfully and walked away. That small moment said everything. Even when they had every reason to shame her, the two men chose grace. They didn't need to win anything, because they already had the respect of the entire room. The woman looked at them again, her eyes now softer, smaller. She didn't speak, but something in her had clearly changed. Her pride had broken, and behind it was something real, something scared, human. The night wasn't over yet, but one thing was certain: the room had completely shifted. And it all started with silence, with patience, with quiet power, and still, the most powerful thing those two men had done was simply be kind. The restaurant was quiet again, but the silence was different now. It wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was filled with respect, a calm that wrapped around every table. Like a soft blanket after a storm, the woman sat still, her hands resting on her lap. She didn't speak. Her face looked pale, and her lips were tight. For the first time since she walked in, she had nothing to say. Then something gentle broke the silence. A small girl stood up from her table again, this time with a single flower in her hand. She walked slowly toward Keanu's table. Her parents didn't stop her. They just watched with soft eyes. She reached the table, looked up at him, and said, "This is for you." Keanu smiled warmly and took the flower with both hands. "That means a lot to me," he said. His voice was calm and deep. The little girl smiled, nodded, and walked back quietly. Everyone in the restaurant had seen it. No one clapped, no one shouted. But something changed in the air again. Like a breeze of kindness passed through the room. Then a man stood up from the far corner of the restaurant. He looked older, maybe in his 60s. He slowly walked over to Denzel's table. His eyes looked watery, like he was holding back tears. When he reached them, he said softly, "I just want to thank you. Years ago, I watched your movie with my son. We weren't close, but after that movie, we talked for the first time in months. That night brought us together." Denzel stood and shook the man's hand with both of his own. "Thank you for telling me that," he said. "It means more than you know." The man patted his shoulder, smiled, and returned to his table, wiping his eyes as he walked away. At the woman's table, her fingers trembled. She had stopped pretending now. There was no one left to impress. She stared at her plate, untouched, as if the food had lost all taste. She turned slightly in her chair and looked at Keanu, really looked at him this time. His face was calm, peaceful, not proud or arrogant. He was still the same as when she first mocked him: simple clothes, kind eyes, quiet smile. She looked down. Again, ashamed. Just then, another person came forward, a young man this time. Maybe in his 20s, he walked over nervously, holding a movie ticket stub in his hand. "Keanu, I just want to say, thank you for being who you are. You've helped me through some dark days." Keanu nodded and stood up. He gave the young man a short hug and said, "You're not alone." The young man's hands shook a little as he stepped back and returned to his table, clearly overwhelmed. Now, it wasn't just one or two people coming forward. One by one, guests began to quietly approach the two men, not to take selfies or get famous, but to say thank you, to tell stories, to show love. And through it all, the two men stayed the same, calm, kind, full of grace. The woman watched it all in silence. Her chest felt heavy. She didn't know why, but her eyes began to sting. She wiped the corner of her eye with her napkin, pretending it was just something in the air. For the first time she remembered something. Her father, who used to tell her, "Being loud doesn't make you strong. Being kind does." She had ignored those words for years, chasing attention, chasing power. Now in front of her sat two men who didn't say a single cruel thing. didn't raise their voices, didn't shame her, and yet, they made the whole room respect them. With just their presence, the restaurant staff brought dessert to the quiet table again. This time with a small candle in the center. "It's not anyone's birthday," Denzel laughed softly. The manager smiled. "It's a thank you candle from all of us," guests chuckled gently. And the two men gave a small bow to the room. The woman lowered her head, something inside her beginning to break open. Not in a painful way, but like a wall falling down after years of holding it up. She stood up quietly and walked toward their table. Her steps were slow, unsure. She didn't speak right away. Just stood there with her hands nervously holding each other. Everyone in the restaurant watched, waiting to see what would happen next. Keanu looked up at her and gave a small nod. Welcoming her to speak, she opened her mouth, but nothing came out at first. Her voice cracked as she finally said, I'm sorry." Denzel gave her a soft look, and Keanu smiled gently. "It's okay," he said. "Everyone makes mistakes." The woman looked at the flower on the table, then at the people still watching. "I thought being loud made me strong," she said. "But I was wrong," Denzel replied. "It takes more strength to stay silent than to shout." She nodded, holding back tears. "Thank you," she whispered, and then she walked back to her table slowly, not defeated but changed. That moment stayed with everyone in the restaurant, because they had all seen something powerful. Not anger, not revenge, but forgiveness and grace. And it all started with two men who didn't need to prove anything. The woman sat down slowly, her eyes still wet. Her heart was beating fast, not from anger now, but from something she had never felt in a long time: regret. She kept looking down at her hands, as if they could hide her shame. The room stayed quiet. But it wasn't heavy. It was peaceful now, like the air after rain. People weren't staring at her with judgment anymore. They were just watching, curious what would happen next. Then Keanu looked around the room. His soft eyes met the faces of the people who had thanked him, smiled at him, and showed respect without asking for anything in return. He stood up slowly, raised his glass of water, and said, "To kindness." It was only two simple words, but they landed like thunder. A few people raised their glasses too, quietly repeating, "To kindness." It wasn't loud. It wasn't planned, but it was real, and it touched everyone in the room. Denzel looked at Keanu and smiled, then added, in a calm voice, "We don't need to be loud to be heard." He placed his glass down and looked toward the woman without anger. "Just honesty. And we don't need to hurt others to feel seen." The woman felt tears pushing up again. She had spent her life trying to prove she was better than others, that she deserved more. She believed that being rich, dressing well, and speaking boldly made her important. But now in one evening, two quiet men had taught her more than money ever could. She stood again, not shaken this time, and slowly walked toward their table once more. She didn't speak right away. She reached into her purse and pulled out something, a small necklace with a golden leaf on it. She placed it gently on the table. "This was a gift from my father," she said softly. "He used to tell me that gold shines brightest when it's humble." She took a deep breath. "But I didn't understand him until tonight." Keanu picked up the necklace carefully, looked at it, and then handed it back to her. "It's beautiful," he said. "And so is what you just said." She smiled a little through her tears and put the necklace back in her purse. It wasn't about giving it away. It was about showing she remembered something she had once ignored. The manager of the restaurant came forward again. He didn't interrupt. He waited for the right moment and said, "Sir, Mr. Reeves, Mr. Washington, would you allow us to thank you with a free meal tonight?" Keanu looked at him kindly. "We're grateful," he said, "but we'd prefer if you gave that kindness to the next family that walks in." Denzel added, "Yes, someone who may need it more." The manager nodded slowly, touched. "It will be done," he said with a small bow. In the corner, a family of 5 sat quietly. Their clothes were simple, and they had shared 2 plates between them. They didn't say much, But the mother had tears in her eyes when she heard what the men said. They had no idea that when they came in, their night would end with such a gift. The woman sat back at her table, but her posture had changed. She wasn't trying to show off anymore. She wasn't pretending. She simply watched, learning quietly, absorbing what was around her. She looked at the waiter she had insulted earlier and waved him over. Her voice was softer now. "I'm sorry," she said. "You didn't deserve how I treated you." The waiter gave a small smile. "Thank you," he said. "That means a lot." Then she did something unexpected. She pulled out her phone, not to post pictures or show off, but to type something real. She opened a social app and wrote a short message. "Tonight I learned something. Kindness is more powerful than pride. Thank you, Keanu and Denzel. You didn't just change my night, you changed me." She pressed post and set her phone down, not caring about likes or comments for once. Just the truth. In that moment, she felt free, not perfect, not suddenly good, but finally honest. For the first time her heart was lighter, not from showing off, but from letting go. As the night came to a quiet end, guests began to leave slowly. Many stopped by Keanu and Denzel's table to thank them again. No cameras, no crowds, just simple moments from real people. The woman stood outside the restaurant for a moment, watching the stars above. The cold air touched her cheeks, but it felt good. It reminded her she was alive, still able to grow, still able to change. Behind her, the little girl from earlier walked past with her parents. She looked up at the woman and smiled. "You were brave too," she said. The woman's eyes filled again, and she whispered, "Thank you." And just like that, the night that began with noise and ego ended with peace and growth. Not because someone won an argument, but because kindness won over pride. The night was slowly coming to an end. The lights inside the restaurant grew softer. The music was calm, and most of the guests had finished their meals. But no one wanted to leave just yet. Something about the evening had made it special, like a quiet magic was in the air. Keanu and Denzel were still seated, smiling and talking quietly. They didn't act like celebrities. They didn't try to be the center of attention. They just sat like ordinary men, gentle, respectful, and peaceful. The woman who had insulted them earlier still remained at her table. She had not touched her food, but her heart had been fed something deeper. Her face looked softer now, not filled with pride or anger, but peace. For the first time in a long while, she felt quiet inside. She stood again slowly, not to make a scene this time, but because she needed to do something real. She walked to the table of the family who had received the free meal, 2 parents and 3 kids. She smiled at them and said, "May I sit for a second?" The father nodded, surprised. She sat and looked at the children. "You have a beautiful family," she said. The mother smiled kindly. "Thank you." The woman took a deep breath. "Earlier, I was not a good example. I forgot what respect means." She looked at the children and added, "But tonight, I saw what real strength looks like. And it's not loud, it's kind." The parents nodded, understanding. The little girl at the table said, "It's okay. Sometimes grown-ups learn too." Those words touched her more than she expected. She smiled with wet eyes, stood up, and thanked the family before returning to her seat near the entrance. The waiter she had insulted earlier stood with another server. Both were talking quietly, still working, still calm. She walked toward them now, one hand slightly shaking. When she reached them, she looked at the waiter and said, "I'm sorry again for how I treated you. You were just doing your job, and I acted like I was better than you." "I wasn't." The waiter gave a small, kind nod. "Thank you, ma'am, that means a lot." Then she did something even more surprising. She took out her purse, pulled out a small envelope with cash, and handed it to him. "This is not a tip," she said. "This is a thank you for your patience, your strength, and your grace." He hesitated, but she gently placed it in his hand and walked away without asking for anything in return. This was no longer about image or attention. It was about learning and changing at the same time. Outside the restaurant, People were gathering, not to chase fame, but because the story had already started to spread. Someone had posted a video clip online showing Keanu helping the little girl, and Denzel shaking hands with the elderly man. The video had gone viral in just an hour, but inside, the two men stayed unaware. Or perhaps they just didn't care about fame. They were living the moment, not chasing attention. The manager walked over to them and said, "There's a small crowd outside. Some fans maybe. Do you want to leave through the back?" Keanu smiled. "No, it's okay. They're just people," Denzel added. "And we are too." They stood up slowly, ready to leave, but before stepping out, Keanu turned and looked at the woman one last time. She stood and walked toward them. She didn't speak at first. She just looked at both men, her eyes full of emotion. Then she said, "Thank you for not embarrassing me when you could have. Thank you for your silence. It taught me more than any words could." Denzel gave her a respectful nod. "Sometimes silence is louder than shouting," he said, "and grace changes hearts more than pride ever will." Keanu smiled gently and said, "We all fall sometimes. What matters is what we do when we stand again." She nodded slowly, as if she finally understood. Then Keanu and Denzel walked toward the exit, and the doors opened slowly to the waiting crowd. But something was different. The crowd outside didn't scream or push. They stood respectfully, some holding signs that said, "Thank you, Keanu and Denzel. Your words changed me." Instead of cheers, there was quiet applause, soft, honest, full of respect. Keanu and Denzel waved lightly, then passed through. The people with ease, the crowd parted for them, like a path being made for two kings, but not kings of power or gold. Kings of kindness, of quiet strength, of character. Inside the restaurant, the woman sat down again, closed her eyes for a moment, and breathed deeply. She had come in with pride, but she left with something far more valuable: humility, truth, and the first step toward becoming better. And the night, once full of noise and ego, had become a memory of calm, growth, and human connection. After leaving the restaurant, Keanu and Denzel walked slowly down the quiet street. The cool night air touched their faces gently, but their hearts were warm from what had just happened. They didn't speak much, but their calm smile said everything. This night had been special. Meanwhile, back inside, the woman who had insulted them sat alone. Her thoughts were heavy, but clearer than before. She pulled out her phone and looked at the video clips people had posted online. She saw the little girl giving Keanu a flower, the old man thanking Denzel, and the quiet respect from the crowd. Her fingers trembled as she watched. She realized how far from kindness she had been, how her loud voice had hurt not just the two men but everyone around her. She felt a deep shame, but also a spark of hope. The next day, she posted a message online, not to boast, but to apologize. "Last night, I was wrong," she wrote simply. "I spoke without kindness and respect. I learned from two of the most humble men I have ever met, Keanu Reeves and Denzel Washington. Thank you for showing me a better way." The post quickly gained attention. Many people shared it, commenting about how important it was to admit mistakes and change. The woman's followers began to see her differently, not just as someone proud, but as someone brave enough to grow. At the restaurant, the staff talked quietly about the night. "It was a lesson for all of us," one waiter said, "that even the quietest people can teach the loudest ones." The manager smiled and nodded. "And that respect is the true currency." Weeks later, the woman visited the restaurant again. This time, she was different. She wore simple clothes, and her smile was soft and real. She asked to speak with the manager and offered to volunteer some time to help train new waiters on kindness and respect. The manager was surprised but happy. "It's never too late to change," he told her, and the woman nodded, feeling lighter than ever before. Keanu and Denzel heard about this from the manager, but they didn't ask for thanks. They were just glad to see a good change. Sometimes, their quiet kindness created ripples far beyond what anyone expected. The little girl who had given Keanu the flower also returned to the restaurant with her family. She saw the woman smiling at the staff and whispered to her mother, "See? People can change." The woman caught her eyes and smiled back. A silent moment passed between them, a moment full of hope. Life continued as usual. But the memory of that night stayed alive. It became a story told softly among the staff and guests, a story about humility, respect, and the power of kindness. And for the woman, that night was a new beginning, not just a memory of shame, but a promise to be better, to listen more, to speak with kindness, and to always remember that true strength is gentle. The evening after that special night, the restaurant felt peaceful and full of hope. The guests who came in talked quietly about what had happened. Many said they had never seen kindness like that before. The story of the woman, Keanu Reeves and Denzel Washington, was now part of the place's heart. Keanu and Denzel had left the city, but their impact stayed behind. The staff often smiled when they remembered the calm way the two men had handled the insults. Their silence had been louder than any words, and their kindness had touched many lives. The woman who had been loud and proud before had changed in many ways. She now came to the restaurant often, not to show off, but to learn and help. She spoke gently with the staff and the customers, offering smiles and kind words. She shared stories of her change with others, telling them about the power of respect and humility. One day, she met the little girl who had given Keanu the flower. They talked quietly, and the girl said, "You have a kind heart now." The woman smiled and nodded. "I am trying to," she said softly. Word about the night and the woman's change spread beyond the restaurant. It reached people who were tired of loud voices and harsh words. It reminded them that being kind, patient, and humble was a true strength. The story inspired many to look inside themselves and choose kindness over pride. The restaurant manager began a new tradition. Every month, he invited people who showed kindness and respect to share a meal for free. He called it the Kindness Night, and it quickly became popular. The staff loved seeing the smiles on the faces of those who came, and the guests felt connected to something bigger than just food. Keanu and Denzel heard about the Kindness Night through friends. They were happy to know their actions had sparked something good. Though they never sought fame or attention, their simple acts of respect had changed a community. The woman who once insulted them now volunteered to help organize the Kindness Nights. She told the manager, "I want to give back, to be part of the change." Her eyes shone with hope and sincerity. The manager welcomed her warmly, proud of her journey. One quiet evening, as the restaurant filled with laughter and soft music, the woman sat at a table, thinking about how far she had come. She remembered the night she had mocked two humble men, and how that night had turned her world upside down. She smiled, feeling grateful for the lesson she had learned. The little girl walked over and sat beside her. "Thank you for being kind," she said simply. The woman reached out and took her hand gently. "Thank you for teaching me," she replied. Their hands held a silent promise to keep kindness alive. The restaurant continued to be a place where people not only shared meals, but also shared respect and understanding. It was a reminder that even in a world full of noise, silence and grace could speak the loudest. And so the story ended not with anger or regret, but with growth, forgiveness, and hope, because sometimes the greatest power is found in kindness, and the quietest voices can change the world.